think it's time to get to know our speakers of tonight and our guests of tonight. As I said, this is organized through the format of those 4+1 engagements. And tonight is the night for urban cultures engagement, of which Martino Tattara is the curator of the program. So he invited also our guest, and Martino, who we see right now coming up. Hello. I would like to give the floor to you to introduce our speaker further.
Yes, good. Thank you, Lilet, and good evening, everyone. I'm Martino Tattara, the curator of one of the 4+1 engagement of our master program, and more specifically of the urban cultures engagement. Thank you all for being here with us this evening, and I'm very happy to follow up on Lilet's introduction of this lecture number 16 of the public program Going Public, a lecture that will be delivered by Chiara Cavalieri and the title From the Diffuse City to the Horizontal Metropolis. I would say that the reasons of this lecture are twofold. On the one hand, this lecture is to welcome Chiara Cavalieri as a new voice within the Belgian architectural and urban debate. Since Chiara has been recently appointed professor at our, if I may say so, sister university, the Université Catholique de Louvain, and I am sure she will be one of the voices actively participating in the coming years in the discussion on urbanism in Flanders, in Brussels, and in Belgium more generally. On the other hand, this lecture is also to celebrate and to present and to discuss a recent publication of a book titled The Horizontal Metropolis, of which I have a copy here, released recently by Park Books, a book that she has edited together with Paola Vigano, with whom she has collaborated with for several years. The book and the lecture of today are the outcome of a long research conducted through several case studies around the world, and I think also across different academic institutions, ranging between China and Switzerland, and from the Veneto region in the northeast of Italy to the Boston metropolitan area. And these case studies have allowed investigation into the idea of the horizontal metropolis, a concept that goes beyond traditional notions of peri-urban, of the suburban, and that conversely hypothesizes the possibility of a new territorial project based on closely interlink rural-urban realms, communication, transport, and economic systems, and that would give form to a new territorial construction where traditional agricultural economic activities would be mixed with perhaps more less traditional form of production. As I said, Chiara is an early career professor at the Université Catholique de Louvain, and also a member of the Habitat Research Center at the EPFL in Lausanne, in Switzerland, an institution where she has taught for many years. She has coordinated and coordinated several research activities and regional visions, such as the Blue Space of the Eurometropolis Lille Kortrijk Tournée, and the Watertal project, which she's coordinating in collaboration with her university and the office Latitude. Having said that, I would like to thank Chiara for accepting our invitation. I'm very happy to have you at our school, and I'd like to leave the floor to you for your lecture.
Thank you, Martino. That was very kind of you. I will start sharing my screen. So good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. although of course I would like to see your face. But I will try anyhow to get a bit in contact with you, I hope, with a question. So I would like to thank Martino for the kind introduction and for the invitation, and Lilith for the very nice support and coordination of this very interesting set of lecture. And I would also like to thank the students that are behind the screen, because they understood they are part also of this organization as an elective course. So first of all, thanks to the people that are attending this lecture. I would like to start spending a few words in clarifying some concepts that are at the base of the research. So the Horizontal Metropolis is a book, as Martino explained, and it is also a book that is summarizing not one, but a set of exhibitions, because we started at PFL in 2015. We went to the Lugano Biennale in 2016, then maybe one of the main was the Venice Biennale 2016 again, then in Belgium here at Beaux-Arts, maybe someone of you had the occasion of visiting it, 2018. And the exhibition was open at the beginning of 2020 in China. And since then, pandemic arrived, we don't have any clue of our materials. And I think the exhibition stayed open a couple of weeks, and that's the last, that are the last news that we have about it. So first of all, is a book and an exhibition, but second of all, is already been, thank you for that, Martino, highlighted, that's a result of a collective research. It's an extended, but also collective. Many people participated to this work. There are some curators, but there are many collaborators, especially at the PFL Lausanne, which has been the place in which we produced the material, while indeed the reflection and the occasion are much more further away in several and different academic possibilities. Many students. So this slide is it's a bit strange to put at the beginning. It was at the end, but I really want to highlight the fact that all this small that you can't read, all the small writing are names of people that actively participate to this big project. So second, as a third concept, I would like to explain that the Horizontal Metropolis, in the way in which we develop it, is already the idea of a project for a specific kind of space. And the space that we're looking at is the one of the diffuse city. Is the space in which there is a different density of urbanity, is a different kind of urbanity, if you want. Is a space in which there is a co-penetration of agricultural network, rural network, rural support, but also a landscape, productive landscape. A landscape where we can product in the term of industry, where we can product in terms of agriculture, and where the atmosphere of rural and urban actually blur. Is a space, as you see in this image, this is the Venice. This is the Venice Horizontal Metropolis. Is a space which is highly infrastructure. So there is a dense deposit of work, which is, it's clear in the construction of a dense road infrastructure, but also in the construction of a dense water infrastructure. In this image, you see in the center, the canal, the couple of canals that are like a landmark of the old Veneto landscape. So this kind of space, the one of diffusion, is a space that is designing, is sketching new, if I may say that, metropolitan geographies all over the world. This image is the very famous light satellite from NASA. And what we see in Europe is very clear, is what is shining the most is Belgium as an extended place of urbanization, and also the Po Valley, which are the most inhabited place of Europe, and which are a kind of prototype of this kind of urbanization. So just for understanding the title of the lecture, the Horizontal Metropolis is meant to be the vision, this is a quote, for the plenary urbanization, is the project for a status quo, which is the one of the diffusion, the diffuse city or city territory. I'll go through different kind of way of talking about this space. So the idea of Horizontal Metropolis is a metamorphosis of the diffuse city, and thinking of bringing to this kind of peripheral space the qualities of the density of the metropolis. is a project that is using the notion of horizontality in two ways. One is quite simple, is the idea of a less dense space where the rate in between built and open space is completely different than the traditional city, but also a rate that has proved to be an asset during, for example, the last climate change effect or also the recent pandemic lockdown. So the second meaning of the use of this horizontality concept is the idea of bringing an equal distribution, of good and equipments in the space that have been thought over the centuries as a servant for the city. So it's the idea of making it independent and with a rather diffuse and isotropic, let's say, services such as the traditional compact cities. So why we say that it's a global, for the global urbanization is because we have been investigating different cases all over the world that have been already mentioned by Martino. These are occasions indeed of a design studio, master thesis and PhD thesis. So more specifically, the two Swiss Horizontal Metropolis are two studios, one a master, one a bachelor in 2014, while Venice is a master thesis in 2015, but that was collecting really a much more long reflection over that space. Boston is the result of a design studio in the fall 2013, where I've been teaching with Paola Vigano, and China is the output of PhD thesis that has been developed in Venice. So over the next half an hour, I will try to explain you again this horizontal metropolis in a threefold way. The first is trying to go through the research protocol, which is more or less the kind of order, the same narrative as that the books propose. But then I will also like to get you in a transversal reading, which is the one of one case. So getting through the different parts of the research throughout one case, which is the one of Boston. And the third, that is more in form of conclusion. It's an opening or a possible path for future development of the horizontal metropolis. So the research protocol is really a bit reflecting on what we find. I don't know if some of you have been reading the book or seen the exhibition. In any case, the idea has been that of describing the tradition, so the studies that have been done on this kind of space, the measures, so is mainly a work of critical cartographies and surveying, and the third, the space of the project. So we'll go quickly through what do we mean by this, and also how do they have been realized and they have been visualized in the different exhibitions. So the tradition is a part that is more developed in a book that will come, which is called The Horizontal Metropolis, an Anthology, but has been prominent in the exhibition. So it's the idea of collecting all those interpretations that over the years I've been looking, naming, analyzing, and sometimes designing the space. And it's a collection of scholars that are from geographers to sociologists to urbanists to architects that have been defining the space with different names. And we find, if we look at this slide, we find that it has been all over the world, although a kind of concentration in Europe. And then it has been mainly during the 90s that this kind of urbanization has been recognized, which means that is more or less the consolidation of the process of urbanization of the Second World War up to the 90s that has been then consolidated and defined and named. I just go through a couple. For example, the Diffuse city comes from Città Diffusa in Dovina, which is the Venetian one. And one very famous is Gottman, which was the first in the 60s. Here in Belgium, we have Marcel Metz, which was talking about la periphery radieuse. And maybe it's worth to mention McGee with the extended metropolis, which was talking about Desakota, which is a word that means city and countryside together. So all of them were describing the same space, of course, the result of different processes. So with this chapter, we didn't want to say that the Horizontal Metropolis is an homogeneous space. It's very different, diversified all over the world, but it has certain common points. So we did interview the people that have been defining this type of city, the ones that are still alive. And we've been visualizing those videos during the exhibition. So you can see from this picture that the age of this scholar is more or less a bit older than me, let's say, but also more or less the same, which is a sign of the fact that there's been in a specific moment in which this kind of city emerged, and this kind of city proposed a shift in the looking, in how we looked at city and territories. So this is the Lausanne exhibition. The proposal was quite simple. There are some videos, and we had the possibility of listening to each one of them. Again, this main part of work is being created by a colleague, and is going to be published soon by Springer. Second part of the protocol is measure, is the idea of looking, measuring in the sense of drawing, but also understanding measure, scales, and distance throughout the different cases. So you have to, every time understanding that these operations are done per 5 case studies. So for each case study, what we have tried to set up a common, let's say, reading framework. So first of all is crossing scales. So there is an observation at the scale of 50 by 50, which is one of the possible metropolitan scale for reading a space. Then there is a scale of 10 by 10, which is a both scale of analysis and design already, and 3.2 by 3.2 kilometers, which I will explain later why this such a bizarre measure is really the scale in which you concentrated the design part. So for each of this scale, we decided to look at a certain fixed themes, which are very, if you want, very basic morphological theme of analysis, because we also wanted to perform some comparison about it. So you can imagine also the difficulty for gathering data in places such as China, for example. But in any case, we had a look to the built morphology, to the water morphology, to the infrastructure of mobility, and also the railways, etc., the public transportation, the landscape of production, in the sense of both the traditional production and the agricultural production, which is the gray in this image. And last was trying to picture also the figure of the forest that has been quite different throughout the different cases. Next to this, the measuring collected also many other what we call thematics or original maps. And just bring an example, which is something that I think everybody did at least once in his career. So try to use the Nolly map as a measure for understanding the permeability and the porosity of the space in a suburban, let's say, condition. So this is a Nolly map done by the student of Lausanne. In the area next to Bussigny, next to the, not so far from the PFL. And of course, here there is always the question, what do we evaluate as public in such a different condition? Because is agriculture public or not? So there are many possibilities of understanding. You can try to understand maybe a public in the sense of landscape and a public in the sense of appropriation of space. So all this material have been collected in the exhibition, in 5 atlases plus 1, because there was one atlas is collecting them all, and so allowing doing some comparison. The atlases were quite big, they were A2 as a scale. So these are some images, and this is this one image again. This is one image from the Lausanne exhibition. So they were next to the other material, next to the models and other material about each case, and they were there for being consulted. Third part of the protocol is a radical project. From the title is the question of designing the spaces. And now we decided to design these spaces, or to look at the spaces and to look in which kind of design for these spaces we We took as a clear, very clear reference, which is Broad City, that you all know, which has been produced by Frank Lloyd Wright and his students, and exhibited in 1935 in the Rockefeller Center. So maybe it's important to point out that this project was a bit a reaction to Le Corbusier Viradieu's. So it's really one other alternative of thinking about the future of city. And the alternative is very clear, is saying, okay, I'm gonna build a density that the territory allowed in terms of food production, which so that the name Broadacre City means that there is one family for each acre, and that family is able to satisfy the needings of food within the properties. So there is really a kind of root of sustainability back in this project. The size is 2 miles by 2 miles. And it's a site that is a sub-model of the American grid. And the idea is that Frank Lloyd Wright described one model as a way of saying that this is the space in which we can reproduce the city all over again. So one word about the scale. So the model was produced at the scale of 1 to 75 inch to feet, which translates in our language in 1 to 877, which is close to 1,000. And you understand it's a scale which is very much close for architecture rather than urbanism. And if you look into detail, the model, some projects are really projects that Wright proposed for other clients that they repropose and reproduce and elaborate here. So just for example, this is a market, this is a shopping mall, this is the part of production. We have some sport facilities. You have also, of course, the gas station. You have all the production of agriculture, etc., etc. So we took this really as a measure. For starting, take one piece with the principle of non-selection. So we took some pieces around our 50 by 50 kilometers, and we tried to explore the way in which we could design them. Except that, one detail maybe I forgot, the 2 miles, which are 3 kilometers point 2 per 3 kilometers point 2 at the scale of 1,877, means molded at the measured 3.75 meters. So quite a huge object, to be clear. And so one of the first, because these are the last results, but we did many trials before getting to the result. So there are many, and not failure, but many other master theses or design studio which worked with this measure, and we tried to understand what it meant to build such a huge object. So the solution, in a way, was found in Lausanne, with a studio of 140 students that proposed to work in between model and axonometries. So some of these models are real models, and some other are simply drawings. And they were working with this model of 73, which became the model of the old project. But it's a simple reason. It's because there was the scale that fitted in the laser cut. So just because there is also some practical meaning. So I will go through all of them, and you understand quite easily where is the not always, where is the model and where is the drawing. So this is the Boston, which is one strip of model. This is the one of Lausanne, so the first, one of the first, because they produced 3 in that course. And then we decided to display only one. This is the one of the Swiss Alpine Valley, produced by a bachelor, very nice one, a lot of topography. This is again a master thesis by Tommaso Pietropolli, the Venice, which is the one that has the most part built as a model and the less of a drawing. And this is the Chinese one, where there is again one strip. And yeah, this is the way in which they appeared in a specific case in Venice. You see here the atlases, and you see also some videos. So for each model, for each case, they're also associated, it's very clear in the book, 2 different gaze. The one from the top, understanding which kind of space are we talking about in a further dimension? And on the other side, the bottom up from the bottom, which are people speaking, inhabitants, normally selected, some normal inhabitants, some people with an enterprise, some farmer if there were kind of criteria. So to try to get the sense also of the place. This is an image, and voila, this is an image that tries to show the three more or less material together. Okay, now we enter in a transversal reading in which I would like to go through tradition, measure, and project throughout one case. And it's the one of Boston, of which, as I said, I was following the student at the GST. So first of all, the material then have been reworked and reproduced in Lausanne. So there was a first preliminary result with the student, but with many, let's say there are many materials behind that are supporting the project. And that is the reason why I choose also to put together some material of the students, even if they're not perfect, they're not finished, but for understanding that behind this model that in the book are some pictures, some images, and some scheme, there is a word of investigation. So Boston, as you know, I guess, it's here in the east coast of US, and is one of the tip of the so-called megalopolis, which is a huge city, which is starting from Boston, passing through New York here, and then getting to Philadelphia, Baltimore, and ending in Washington, DC. Actually, this figure, such as I described, has been seen and described by Jean Gottman already in 1961 by the book which is called Megalopolis. So he coined the term megalopolis first, and the book has been published after at least 10 years of research and some article that came before. So the point of Gottman was, if we are of course in the tradition, in the support descriptive part. The main point of Gottman is quite simple, is that in this space there was a concentration of people, goods, traffic, and infrastructure that had never seen before in the history of the world. So it was a geographer. So there are an extensive list of maps and investigation and figures and number that support this point. This concentration was even of cultural activities, for example. So the main university of Ivy Leagues are in this space, if you think about it. So this huge concentration was about a number of, let's say, traditional factors: people, infrastructure, traffic. Even it was describing even the transformation of land use from rural to urban within this long corridor. But there is one point which for me it's interesting. It's the fact that he was realizing that human organization was no longer dependent from a resource distribution. So for the first time, there is a kind of a fracture in between what is an ecological geography, so people living next to the resource they need, and human organization of works and goods. So this map is showing indeed the water supply needed for the megalopolis, which is going well beyond the main urbanized space. So it's going beyond what Gottman defined as a space of megalopolis. So it's even beyond metropolis. So within this in mind, we start to have a look to what we have been discovering with students during that semester. So this map is a bit of a synthesis, still from the atlas, of the three scales of investigation. So we have the 50 by 50, and then we have the more or less 10 by 10. Here was in miles, so it's not exactly 10. And then there is the 3.2, which is this point. So maybe to be said about the Boston metropolitan areas. This is one of the cases in which the metropolis is the most present, is one of the biggest. It's the bigger of Venice, bigger of Lausanne, for sure, bigger of Valais. And there is a very strong radiocentric geometry. You can see easily from the main infrastructure. So this is the center and these are the radius. So we can easily and quickly recognize also in the public transportation, because the red are the railways. You can easily recognize two figures, the one of the main corridor and what is in between that I'm going to call for the moment the carpet. So voila, this is one image of the corridor. So there are these strips, commercial strip, very much within our American imagination. This is one huge mall with this huge and always empty parking lots. This we happen to know, we discovered during the semester. That was one of the first early suburban shopping mall opening in US in 51. Then it has been demolished and rebuilt. But we are we are really in the megalopolis, in one of the places that historically have been built around these corridors. And this is a map of the commerce. There is almost no production, but there's a lot of commerce in the region. And at the point that some of the students started to compare the US, the Boston strip with the one of Venturi. So they started to do the same kind of map for trying to understand the kind of space that we had. The figure of corridors is also highlighted by looking at the public transportation, but we understand this is a map that is showing the public transportation that have been dismissed and are the one dotted, understanding that this radiocentric geometry was not that strong back in time. So there were some north-south connections that have been progressively dismantled. One other very important point, again, on water supplies of this is a very nice work that has been done by a student, which is now teaching in the University of Hawaii. So she tried to understand the urbanization of this space, the suburbanization of this space, by looking at the evolution of the water supply. And she discovered, and this is the meaning of this circle here, she discovered that while the city was growing, they needed to open and to use, to extend the water supplies to further and further reservoirs. So this aqueduct had been built as long as the city, as the population of the city and of the surrounding of the city, because Cambridge and Boston are one city, unique city. Cambridge is here, Boston here. So one part of this corridor logic is also built by the deep infrastructure, which is the question of supplying. On the other side, we have this kind of homogeneous landscape, which is made by forest and by residence. So the forest, as you can see, now I go back to the 50 by 50, is a quite diffuse and quite present pattern in Boston. And you might think it's a structure, but indeed it's the opposite, is a leftover figure, because is the reconquering of some spaces by the forest that before they were dedicated to agriculture. So as long as a certain system of extensive agriculture has been developed in the East Coast, in the West Coast, pardon, so this agricultural field in the West, not so much productive, has been abandoned, and the forest took over. So it's a leftover forest, but it is also an inhabited one, because if you look closer, we see that within this figure from the top, there are many, the distribution of many, what we really call suburbs. And if you look at also the history of the suburbs, this is a map which is highlighting what has been built in red after 1961, meaning after the publication of Megalopolis by Gottman. And you see that is really, we have really the pattern of what we, in our imagination, is the suburb. The dead-end street, very, very low density, and monofunctional. You understand, you see immediately from the size of the building that there are no specific function. The function are mainly next to the main corridors. So students have been studying deeply, I have to say, this question of density and the question of a possible densification of this tissue, and they started to divide the different type, we can call them type of residential building, and you see here the type, the density, even compared to the acre. So going back to right, and also on the top there is the distribution of this pattern within the municipality border of Framingham. We were in a municipality which is called Framingham. So within this, let's say, quick overview of the background that we had, we started to understand how to transform this middle ground here. The main, we call this the Città Diffusa, we call it middle ground because we were quoting an essay from Robert Fishman, which was describing the space as the middle ground, the space in between. A space which was growing, of course, and then discussing with the municipalities, we understood that by 2030, and we were in 2013 at the moment, we were expecting 10,000 new inhabitants. And so there was a question of where do we put these inhabitants? How do we densify the spaces? And we started with the student, and we proposed a very simple hypothesis, I have to say, which was a bit mutuated from Albert Pope and the ladders, which is the one of contrasting the figure of the corridor with the figure of the mesh. So trying to work also on different kind of connection, north-south, you see here, north-south, and also, let's say, within this corridor, the idea is that we start to distribute a certain number of functions, which nowadays we can find only on the strip. So it's a question of densifying and mixing the use of certain parts along certain, of course, certain specific road network. So this is the image that the student proposed, and we reproposed the same in the atlas, which is here in red. The square is our Rodaic city, but then again, as I said, there is an intermediate scale, which is balancing project and an analysis at an even larger scale. So as I said, this is quite simple. It's a selection of a certain number of roads with a certain, let's say, extension and section. And imagining that starting from parcels, we could densify and diversify the use. So changing the zoning plan, of course, adding a possible public transportation. This is a bit the main. Then there is an old question about reusing a certain number of abandoned infrastructure, such as railways, aqueduct, etc., for slow mobility. And then there is the question of using the forest as an element for structuring the open space and not as a leftover. Just a look to the area picture of this 3.2. So you see, it's quite clear. This is the strip. The Venturi Strip, really with a lot of parking lots, a lot of malls, but also a lot of surfaces, offices, etc. The strip is quite large. A section of the road, if I remember well, is like a highway. It's like 30. It's no more. It's 50 something. So it's really huge. And we have also an highway crossing by, and all the rest. You see that the limit in between this multifunctional strip and the monofunctional residence is quite sharp. And then there is this lake, which is not very much used as a big public space, but it's instead a kind of private landscape for each one living next to it. So the metamorphosis of this middle ground, it's starting from this idea of the mesh. And we decided, this is for all cases, to try to show this proposal, this paths of design, because they are not really going into the detail, using some figures of space. So this is for each project. There are some figures. This is the kind of graphic that we also use for the figures, which try to describe different kind of intervention that are not intervention that are, let's say, imposing hierarchies of space, are just way of reading a possible metamorphosis. So in this case, we used, I anticipated a bit, the first figure is the forest. So it's the idea that this whole space, which is only forest, not the inhabited, this is only forest, could be structured and equipped as a park. And so becoming also space of slow mobility and a distribution throughout the territory, which is for the moment only lived by the use of the car. There are no other possibilities. The second figure is the main one, is the one of the mesh. So is the question of selecting a certain roads, is the question of densifying certain part of these roads, is the question of rethinking the whole strip and try to redesign the section, try to understand if we can imagine a kind of boulevard there. We can densify there in terms of reducing. We can build maybe on top of this mall because there were only one floor. So maybe we could imagine to add one second floor in order to achieve the question of densification that they raise. While the third figure, the carpet, is let's say the background, what we have in the background. And it's this really low density area in which we propose small densification in each plot. And also we propose to sometimes to break the huge urban blocks with the pedestrian path in order to improve the slow mobility permeability, because sometimes it's really a question that you have to really cross your urban blocks from going to one point to the other. Why, if you can go through, that would be 2 minutes. So the way in which we designed this figure is kind of this. They're quite details, and there are some, let's say, prototypical intervention that are described as social spatial prototypes in the books, which are described like this. And then they also have different kind of visualization that collect both students' material, both some, for example, the forest as a collage, or a details of the map here on the left, or here the carpet, exactly with the white is the densification, or some detail or picture of the model that are kind of trying to explain this different type of intervention. I insist on the question of type because they are not generic, because they are related to the space, but they are kind of intervention that we could imagine to propose elsewhere within the same context, in the same prodaic, in a way. This is an image, and this in the case is Lausanne, in which people are on the model and on the atlas. I will like to pass to the last in form of a conclusion. So we repropose the exhibition many times, and every time we change it. We added some part. For example, here in Beaux-Arts, we had to completely imagine a new way of displaying the models because they're huge and there was no space. And we wanted absolutely to have them together, so we did inclinate them. But the main point of the Beaux-Arts is not this, is the fact that we added case studies. So we proposed, since Belgium is really one of the place where the question of diffuse city and diffuse urbanization is present, and we could really think about a project of emancipation, we added 3 case studies, and we added 1 Flemish case study, 1 Walloon case study, and 1 Brussels case study. To be specific, we studied with Michileane the periphery of Ghent for Flanders. We studied the Val de Sambre as a case study of one of the projects of the office of Paola Viganò for Wallonie, and from Brussels we developed let's say one space that was highlighted by the vision Brussels 2030. We did this part with Géry Leloutre, ULB, and it's the east. No, sorry, it's the west part. So here is this line is the Chaussée de Ninove. So we are next to the Pajotterland, etc. So you can see that there is the before and the after. Is because at the opening of the exhibition, the model were empty. And during the exhibition, we had a workshop with the student and we produced the project. So in 10 days with the student, we proposed some future path for each one of these spaces. This is for saying that the idea of proposing a protocol that seemed to us to be less strict than a methodology, then I don't know, maybe you can react on that. It was also a way of understanding that it's something we can replicate for looking and understanding and unfolding new paths for this page with an hypothesis which is ambitious, but it's simple, which is the one of horizontalities. Thank you very much, and I'm finished. I hope that was clear.
Thank you. Super enlightening, and to see all those projects coming by in this very thorough methodology of building up over the years. That it makes it really nice, so that the research is prolonging and going on. As a start of the Q&A, I would like to give the floor to one of the students that you already mentioned, who have been working on you, studying your book, and have some questions prepared. And that is Tessa Hulsman. Maybe, Tessa, you can ask some very first questions. I try to get your conversation. Yes, you are. Maybe put on your video as well. Yeah.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Chiara, I thought it was very interesting to finally hear your side of it. I really liked it. My first question was about how I like this utopian vision, radical vision you have, but it still stays very realistic and reasonable because it stays very local. But what I was wondering is if you feel any differences in how radical the projects can evolve in different places,
in different,
or if you feel any differences in how the projects can evolve. Like, for example, if the Italians reacted differently on the project in Venice than, for example, the case study like the Chinese reacted in Hangzhou. Do you feel any differences there?
Well, first of all, some projects have been, let's say, result of long reflection. So giving also the opportunity of having discussion with the stakeholders, with inhabitants, etc. And so this might create a bit of disbalance, because I can reply that at the end of a long work on Veneto, which is not only this, is also, for example, what has been published as Water and Asphalt, we had a few stakeholders that started to want to discuss with us, but it was within 10 years. And so as a basic, I can also tell that in Belgium, we had a very short moments of workshop, but I can tell that the way in which this project might be implemented, not in the totality probably, but starting from some prototypes, etc. I feel that there is much more room for discussion and ground for discussion. Then for the question of utopian or being radical, I think that there was a student in GSD that was saying all the time, we want to do a metamorphosis and not a revolution, but with the same level of extreme imagination. So it's a question of trying to fix the stream image you can and work with the back planning. I have also to tell that if I compare to the moment in Boston, it was 2013 up to today. For example, at the time, the notion of transition was not even there. We were talking about sustainability, about ecological urbanism, about many of these questions, but these urgencies which is today, which I feel today is more there, was still not there. So it has been, there are basic hypotheses behind that. There is a question of recycling, which now we know as stop beton, non-Atlantic, but it's that question of reusing what is there, because we can, there is space for that. And within the reuse and the recycle of the densification, you can bring quality. This transformation with quality, I think we should really work with. That was already there. And then there is the question of looking at the ecological machine, being it water, being it forest, and valorize. And then this the question now is called ecosystem services. And then there is one last maybe main chapter, which is the one of reducing the public mobility, which is has been on the table since year, and now we're discussing about reducing CO2. Okay, we have two paths, and the one of electric car, and the one of really investing of public transportation, which we chose the second. The one of imagine there is no car, there is more space free for other activities. And I think that the pandemic is also raising clearly this question. We're going toward the private mobility, but if you look at the space of the road, there is no space enough for us to wait to enter the store, and the car for parking, and the bar for having their terrace. So there is already a question of who is gonna give up for this transformation. I don't know if actually, I don't know if I really replied to your question.
Yes, you did. I had another question, because every case study seems so different, or like have a very different narrative. And I was just wondering how you start, how you dig in the city. Like, do you just explore, or do you have some basic rules you apply to every city?
No, as I said, I mean, it seems such a linear process, but it's not at all a linear process. I'm not really, not at all. So, but one part of the reply is that there's also another way of showing you this project, which is by comparison. Because if you start to look close at China and Veneto, we see that the embedded rationality, so the whole question of constructing the space around the water, drainage, agriculture, etc., is quite similar. Or the Boston and the Lausanne are quite very much to piece of peripheries that are now becoming independent in a way. So, well, more Lausanne than Boston, but in any case, it's the same, let's say, starting point. So this is also, I mean, they're not so different as they seem. The other question is that, as I said, we have been investigating this kind of space for many times. I've been working with Paolo Vigano and Seki when he was alive, 10 years. And when I started, there was not a question of the Brexit on the table, but it was a question of how to intervene within the space. And then piece by piece, when we started measuring this 3.2, the result, the output of the Boston case study and some thesis, etc. Then we decided in Lausanne in how to, let's say, try to, I don't want to say uniformize because it's a bit too much, but to capitalize that work within a coherent organization. The models, as I said, have been done when we found the key, which was not all model, but some pieces, and the other is a drawing. Then this has been the rules. This has been done, let's say, we had also a common legend with the possibility of changing. Have you seen, no? There are different color palettes, but in any case, some rules that are, so that has been systematized, top down. And also the atlases, but starting from existing material, which are different. So there are some, let's say, images that are the same, which are the basic, as I said, the morphology, the production, etc. And then there are other materials that are nourishing each different project.
Yeah, I really like how it's kind of chaotic, but at the same time very, very clear. Like, yeah, that's something.
I was collecting for a moment the master thesis in Venice that worked with this model, but no one did the step of doing. Of course, no one did because it was too big. So I think that the best point we reached was two students working on the metropolitan area of Venice, near Verona, a bit far away from Venice. And they built a model at the scale of 5,000, which was already 1.5 meters, super detailed. So which was already super good. Mm-hmm. But there are a certain number, but they're not failure. There are fundamental steps to reach the result, which are in the background. So I started to collect it because I think they should be mentioned, because without this work, we would have never arrived there.
Yeah. Then I have one more question, maybe if you have time. I read the case study of Liedekerkebos, like one of the 3 case studies that was in the Beaux-Arts, together with the Horizontal Metropolis. And yeah, like you just said before, you talked about a soft mobility lifestyle and car-free zones, mm-hmm. To create like an urban forest that the people of the city can find their peace in the forest. And they try to reduce the traffic there as much as possible. And I myself, I study interior architecture, so I don't know much about urbanity, but I was wondering how you see traffic evolve in the Horizontal Metropolis.
I see it's clear the idea of reducing the most possible the cars and of sharing. We can say no car. In any case, many studies about the idea of no car or post-car world have been developed over the last year, because it's a question of what if, as a scenario, there are no cars, how much space we gain. Of course, then if you back plan a bit from the scenario to the reality, I think that, for example, in the big city, the sharing mobility is working very well. In Milan, over the last 10 years, it was full of car. This sharing, like the zip car, not the very quick one that you open with, not the cambio that you have to reserve. It's like the very quick one that changed completely the urban landscape. I mean, there are some boulevards with at the park in the center that I've never seen before in my life because there were cars. And now we have park banks. So I think it's possible, honestly. It's mainly, as always, it's mainly policies-wise, this question. But I think that our role and our duty is also to demonstrate the added value of this.
Yeah. Okay. That were my questions.
Thanks, Tessa. I have some questions, but I would also like to involve in the discussion Martin Geisen, who is a member of our faculty and part of our engagement, who I know has already, let's say, engaged in several discussions together with Chiara. Perhaps I will start and then I leave you, Martin, also time, because I have a question which is in fact related to the discussion that came about from, let's say, the question of Tessa that she just posed. And I would like to ask you, Chiara, if you could, okay, we have discussed about mobility, but of course, one of, I would like to maybe put the question a little bit more broadly and ask you if you could, let's say, reflect upon the relationship between these hypotheses of the horizontal metropolis and the environmental challenges more in general. Mm-hmm. And about, I think, one important issue, which is, because I see, let's say, and let's say, completely in line with your idea and the hypothesis of intervening through, let's say, densification. But I'm wondering what was, let's say, your hypothesis in relation to the function of this territory, because we know that many of these territories are generally monofunctional residential spaces. And how do you see them, let's say, changing in terms of, for example, production, which I think is also an important, let's say, component when dealing with these, let's say, shall we say, suburban, let's say, territories.
X and no, because I said.
I mean, X in your hypothesis, that's why I say X.
So there are two set of answers to your question. So the first is that, let's say, underneath, there was this idea of climate change adaptation and mitigation, if you want. No, so from one side, but which is the idea, which is already a bit old, I would say, yeah, in a sense. But let's try to understand that this project, the last one of them, has been done in 2014. So 6 years in this moment, which I feel that things are going very, very fast. It's not old, but I mean, it's more obvious in a way. So there was this idea of mitigation of climate change, which is simply reducing the CO2 emission and reducing the energy consumption, which means, exactly as I said, recycling what is existing, not to use the car. So this is a solution, improving, for example, the forest for CO2 compensation. And also the idea of not building new, but rework the assistant was a bit in line with this embodied energy idea, that we should really preserve that idea and try to renovate what is existing, even if energy consuming, you know, because there is this huge problem on the table that many of these tissues have been built in a moment in which the energy was super cheap, and of course with no end. So these tissues are really consuming. So one of the simple proposal was, okay, let's work in this direction in terms of mitigation, and on the other direction in terms of adaptation, which is the whole coping with consequences already there. So mainly, not mainly, but in many of these cases was the question of water, and not water scarcity, which now is on the table, but was the opposite of water as a risk at that point. So this, again, simple idea, but at the same time is radical, to try to work within the space of flooding as a public space, which can be multifunctional, which where we can't build new building, because some as simple exercise of zoning law and place to be built, you see that you are on space of risk. Even here in Brussels, you know, I'm doing with the same team more or less the study of the 20th century belts, and we are doing this exercise, saying all the space to be built, where are them? And many of them are in spaces of risk. This is a really simple exercise, but still to try to demonstrate that and to explain and to define a space as a park, not as a leftover, to keep it, and to imagine that it can have water inside when it rains. Why not? Can infiltrate, can have many functions. So this is in a way the first part of the answer. The other one is more related to the things that things are going very fast today, very, very fast. So that was, as we were seeing, not revolutionary, yeah, but just now I think that all of this should be the basis and going fast and fast and fast, because the transition, which is putting, I would say, the question of time on the table, because it's urgent, no? The pandemic as well. So this after 2020, I really think that there are some of this levier, some of this thing that should really put some clear objectives. As I said, some of this question became policies, Stop Beton or the Green Deal, now European. I mean, there is a bit the translation of these first ideas into policies, but still there's a lot of work to do, in my opinion.
Thanks,
Chiara, an interpretation and a question. Let me first start with the interpretation. What we have met, I think it was 5 years ago at the UNU conference in Lausanne. And while developing my own thoughts on collective spaces and what we call also the Flemish interpretation of the Horizontal Metropolis, you were developing these thoughts on the Horizontal Metropolis. I always thought, or I always interpreted the text or the work by Secchi on the next urban question as a kind of starting point. And in this text, he puts what I think still is a very strong hypothesis on the table, stating that whenever an economy and a social structure goes into a kind of crisis, a new form for a city will arise. And he has formulated as a kind of a hypothesis. And when I witness what is going on at these times, I do wonder if we are not witnessing a kind of crisis of an urban form, and a new urban form is arising. And there the Horizontal Metropolis is taking a very strong position as a potential candidate for being this kind of new form of living together. So I think in the interpretation of these territories, this knowledge or this awareness of crisis is something that could be added in a narrative and put forward in the narrative. But related to this, and this is something I've always been wondering on, is the question on the social dimension. You are mentioning a lot on the ecology, you're mentioning a lot on the mobility and so on. But for me, there is a very strong question on the social inclusion, the social dimension in these kind of tissues. If you have the bad luck of not owning a car or not being able to drive a car, there is a problem living in this dispersed territory or this horizontal metropolis. So I think there is still a line of thought to be developed on tackling this kind of topics. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly a question, but more a kind of interpretation.
I can react. Thank you very much. So now, first of all, I would like to make clear one point. The proposition of horizontal metropolis does not exclude the city as such. It's simply that there are many attention towards the compact city, and also in this idea of saying that the compact city is is more sustainable. I'm not sure of that, because it's sustainable because you have this whole surrounding of servant territories. No, the horizontal metropolis propose that the servant territories can work for themselves, and then to also keep them, so give them back in a way what has been only in the center, but they work together. That's the point. The idea is that they can work really together in a different kind of relationship. So it's not because we had quite a few discussions with the former Landsbouwmeester, because they said, no, sorry, you're going to open this exhibition in Brussels, and I'm doing a huge campaign on Stop Beton. We said, Karma, we're not absolutely saying that the suburbanization is the way of doing it. We're saying that this is a point, and unless you decide to demolish part of it, which is the idea of it, we should do something with it, because it's something that exists. The famous switch in between urban and rural population of 2010 recorded by UN is happened there because those places became urban, not because people in 2010 moved from countryside to the city, because the city moved outside. So this is the first very important point for me, that it's really both, but it's an attention to a space which deserves to be considered in itself. As for the social inclusion, absolutely, but there is room for many things in this research, and it's very open. It's just an opening on the, as I said, I feel it's almost already old in a way. I can say that maybe the way in which to proceed didn't allow us to go in depth with the social part and also participation of the inhabitants. Although, for example, in Veneto, we had some season of workshop that were about social inclusion, etc. So, but it's true. We try to a bit put the point of view of the inhabitants with the interview that are quite well explained in the book. But yeah, of course there is space, and that's a fundamental part.
If I may, sorry, Martin, if I may just jump into this discussion, I think that to me, one, let's say, crucial aspect in relation, let's say, to the general hypothesis that Chiara presented, but also in relation to, let's say, the problem and let's say, the social dimension that this, let's say, project could entail, I think needs also to take into consideration issue of a property.
Yeah.
And let's say a sort of process of let's say redistribution. And I think that and maybe this is perhaps maybe something that could become maybe a question for Chiara, that I mean, at least I haven't worked, of course, I have worked on similar situation, but not, of course, the one that have been presented and Chiara discussed tonight, but especially some of these territories are, let's say, quite prone to, let's say, be transformed exactly because, in a way, the form of property and set of values upon which they've been built are today in crisis. And I think, in a way, they represent actually an opportunity, exactly because of these somehow problems that they're facing. And perhaps here we need to, let's say, differentiate between different conditions. But what, in a way, it is certainly present is that many of these territories, exactly because of the current economic circumstances, could in fact become, let's say, the seat for, let's say, such a process of redistribution, which I think could really potentially, let's say, unfold into, let's say, a project that would transform this from a very, let's say, exclusionary territories into something that could become more, let's say, inclusive.
Well, no, it's difficult to disagree with you, Martino. That's absolutely true. What I might maybe add is that this degree of inclusion and redistribution, it's a bit different throughout the cases, I have to say. Because, you know, maybe a bit the città diffusa in Italy is really a città diffusa. It's I mean, with all the problem of traffic and the typical problem of periphery, but it's the redistribution, if you want, is already there. I mean, people don't go to the city. They don't go to the city. While in other places, it's a project to be completely done. For example, Boston is quite radical. The character of suburbanization and no redistribution, in a sense. I feel that there is a certain degree of, but not only about redistribution, also about the question of risk and about the question of properties. That's fundamental. But I feel that there is needed a shift in general towards a more operational thinking now. So, of course, if we got stuck in the question of properties within this, let's say, design exploration, because I don't want to call them projects. There are design exploration. Of course, we would have stopped much before, but now maybe it's also the way in which it evolved. I take again the stop beton. Stop beton is really putting the question, okay, let's recycle, let's demolish, but to do all of this, we need to talk with owners. And I think that's nice, but that's I think it's a shift of how to be operational in a way.
Maybe Chiara, a small addition or reflection as well. I think it's, for me, there is always a question on the idea of the traveling concept. If what you, and it was also tapping up on a question or something that Martino remarked. If you're talking about, as in the Boston case, we're talking about something which is very monolithical. It's a suburbia, as you mentioned it, and Martino also referred to it. But if I always refer to the Belgian or the Flemish situation, which is in fact which has been a project already since 150 years, where there has been a very deliberate idea of including the landscape or the countryside into the urbanization. So for me, the Belgian landscape has, or the Belgian countryside has a very long tradition of this, what we could call a kind of pre-horizontal metropolis. It has been a project already for a very long time. So I think there's a question as well on can we compare these situations? Can we all put them under the same name? And can we compare Boston to Belgium to the Veneto areas because of this long tradition we have in the Belgian context as well?
Yes, no, I agree, absolutely. And
so, and so, Martino, since you're talking about this idea of redistribution, actually the Belgian project was a project of redistribution already 150 years ago. So
of residences.
Sorry?
It was a project of redistribution of place of residence.
Yes.
And there is something to be redistributed. But I like what I think it was student. I don't dare to pronounce the Dutch, Martin something, which is raising the possibility of cooperatives adding the discussion of properties, which is a bit really Belgium, because this whole garden cities movement, very, very strong in Belgium. I think it's one, but it's on the table, at least for the moment in the metropolis. The cooperatives are in the political table in Brussels, for example. The problem is to have them shift. Then I must say, there is one big absent in this project, which also, again, I don't want to justify, but I feel it came out a bit now, which is the work, the place of work, which is absolutely extreme today with the pandemic, but even before. I mean, the very much related with mobility, but we could also imagine to reduce mobility and change the way we work, which doesn't mean necessarily to work home, but could be to keep the space with much more, let's say, hybrid and multifunctional space for workers. For example, in these times, it's very much up to date. But even before, I feel this is a question that is absolutely absent. But for example, could have been a question in the case of Boston, because people every day take the car and do at least 35, 40 minutes of commuting. It's less in Veneto, because there is a lot of employment there, because there is a lot of production. In Boston, there is nothing. There is no production, no agriculture. So really, the big attractor is the metropolis.
Thank you very much, Chiara. And I would like to leave the floor to Lilith for her final remark.
Thanks, Martino. And add my thanks to Chiara. Thank you so much for this wonderful evening and all your insight and talks. It makes us eat content just before dinner.